It's been 16 months we have this war in Ukraine. Is there anything good out of this war for Ukraine or even for NATO?
Well, first of all, it's not a war. Let's be very clear on the language, because language does matter. If this was a war, it would be over. Ukraine would not exist anymore. This is a special military operation, and that's not just Russian propaganda at play. It's a statement of fact, a statement of reality. There are limitations to what Russia is seeking to accomplish and the means that Russia is using to accomplish this. And so we just need to be straight up honest about this. If this is a war, Zelensky wouldn't be alive. The Ukrainian Rada wouldn't be able to convene to vote ridiculous legislation. And the Ukrainian army would have been destroyed a long time ago. It's a special military operation with very limited objectives, but important objectives. The elimination of all NATO presence in Ukraine. This means demilitarization of the Ukrainian armed forces. And the Russians offered to do it the easy way, voluntarily. Ukraine opted to resist, pushed by NATO, and now it's being done the hard way. But 400,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers means it's being done, and it will continue to be done. Denazification means the end of the Bandera scourge on the planet. Banderists exist everywhere. I just was down in Ellenville, New York. Drove by the Banderist camp that's there, where they have a monument to the heroes, Stepan Bandera, Roman Shushkevich, and the other disgusting people from Ukrainian nationalist history are here on American soil. They honor them. Just this year, they held a camp where they brought together children of American Ukrainians who wear the uniform of the Ukrainian scout movement, a brown uniform that looks very much like the Hitler Youth, and they hold up the portraits of Stepan Bandera, and they carry banners with Nazi symbology on it that exists today. When this conflict is over, that should no longer exist in Ukraine. The evil that was Stepan Bandera, that continued to manifest itself today through the ideology of the Zelensky regime, should be terminated. And Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO, ever. It will not happen. Has anything good come out of this conflict? Not a damn thing. The Ukrainians are being slaughtered. That cannot be seen as good. It should never have happened. The United States and NATO have wasted hundreds of billions of dollars of their respective taxpayer money providing equipment to Ukraine in the vain hope that somehow that will allow Ukraine to defeat Russia. An insane concept to begin with. This equipment has been destroyed. It's not achieving what they wanted. The Ukrainian government still exists. This is not a good thing, ladies and gentlemen. These are not good people. They are not a democratic society. They are not representative of anything other than the hate-filled ideology of Stepan Bandera. That's not good. And NATO is in the process of pretending that it is relevant. It's had a summit where it wants to expand NATO military power, imposing a tax burden on the citizens of Europe who shouldn't have to waste their money on the false promise of militarism, which is what NATO is. It's not a defensive alliance. It's an offensive alliance. It's shown this repeatedly, and it is responsible for the aggression that's taking place today in Ukraine. Nothing good has come from this war except the following. The world no longer has an excuse to buy into Western propaganda about Russia. Russia is on the right side of history, and the world is starting to see that. You saw it in the gathering in South Africa with BRICS summit, how well Russia was received. Yes, Vladimir Putin couldn't attend because of the absurd International Criminal Court warrant that was put out for his arrest. Sergei Lavrov arrived as a hero, and Russia was treated as a major player on the world stage, treated very well, better than the United States is treated in similar situations. So you could say that that's good, but we can't talk about anything good coming from this conflict until this conflict is over. And this conflict will only end on terms that are acceptable to Russia. And sadly, this means that even more Ukrainian men are going to die. Tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions more of Western taxpayer dollars is going to be squandered in terms of destroyed military equipment given to the Ukrainians in a futile effort to defeat the Russians. Tens of millions of Ukrainians will be displaced from their homes. Trillions of dollars of damage will be done to the Ukrainian infrastructure. There's a possibility if this war goes on long enough, Ukraine will lose more territory permanently to Russia, and that the Ukrainian state, what we can call a state that emerges from this conflict, will be a shadow of what it was before this conflict began. But the good news is NATO's dreams of expanding into Ukraine as part of their overall strategy to destroy Russia, to defeat Russia, will have been defeated. And NATO will have been exposed as the arrogant, imperialist, aggressive military alliance that it is. And hopefully, by exposing the truth about NATO, it'll lose its luster. And 50 years from now, people will be talking about something that has been, as opposed to something that continues to be.
How's the situation of the Ukrainian army today after this failed counteroffensive?
They're dying. I mean, it's as simple as that. They're dying. They're failed. Well, they have made for TV moments. They just did one the other day where Ukrainian commandos went on speedboats, landed on some obscure peninsula on the Crimean Peninsula, ran up, put a flag on a building, took a picture, and then ran away. And they're calling this a victory. Meanwhile, Russia is destroying the Ukrainian army on the field of battle where it counts. Ukraine can have little propaganda victories here, there, and everywhere. But the bottom line is their army is being destroyed. The army that NATO built is being destroyed. It's not succeeding in its goals and objectives. Meanwhile, the Russians, in addition to destroying any attacking Ukrainian force, has launched their own attack in the Kupiansk area where they're advancing, threatening the capture of Kupiansk, threatening to overwhelm the Ukrainian defenders, threatening the city of Kharkov with capture. This is not going well for the Ukrainians, and it won't go well. There will never be a moment in history going forward where the Ukrainian army is going to have a good day. Every day is going to be a bad day for them from now on.
Do we know any opposition inside Ukraine that challenged the Zelensky administration?
I think the Zelensky administration has spent the last year and a half destroying any vestige of democratic institutions. There's no longer a free press in Ukraine. So how can you have an opposition point of view be heard by the people if it's silenced and suppressed by the government? Any opposition politician that spoke out is treated as a traitor, because to question Zelensky means you support the Russians by default. So they've been killed, murdered. They've been arrested, tortured, driven out of the country. There is no opposition, and the Ukrainian people are scared to speak out.
We know after these cluster munitions, they're sending F-16s and they're talking about cruise missiles. How do you see the Biden administration's policy?
It's a policy that's criminal in terms of what it's doing to the Ukrainians, because none of those weapons have turned out to do anything other than prolong this war and kill more Ukrainians. The cluster munitions have not had a meaningful impact on the battlefield. Yeah, they've killed some Russians, but it continued a war that Ukraine's losing. Ukraine is losing men at a rate of 8 to 10 for every Russian killed. So every time they fire a cluster munition off, and let's say it kills 20 Russians, you got 160, 200 Ukrainians dying as a result. That's not victory. That's math that'll never add up to a victory. This is stupidity on a massive scale, criminal stupidity. The F-16s, it's a joke. It's an old fighter. Don't people understand what Denmark and the Netherlands and now Norway are giving to the Ukrainians? Expired fighters, fighters that no longer have operational life in them. That's why they're giving them away. They're giving them fighters that are unsafe for NATO pilots to fly, but we're going to let Ukrainian pilots who have no training fly them against one of the best air forces in the world, supported by the most deadly air defense system in the world. And we say we're helping the Ukrainians? Cruise missiles. Again, why do people continue to buy into the ludicrous notion of a wonder weapon? Wonder weapon is an ideology that came, or a concept that came out of World War II. Adolf Hitler, by the way, where he had his, the V1 and the V2 rockets. These were the wonder weapons. They were going to change everything. They killed people, but they changed nothing. And the Germans can give the Ukrainians the Taurus missile. It's not a game-changing technology. Russia is fully aware what the Taurus missile is, and Russia will adapt to its inclusion in the battlefield threat model, and they will destroy it. They will neutralize the platforms delivering it. They will alter their footprint on the ground to make ineffective any targeting, and the war will continue with the Ukrainians losing 8 to 10 dead for every Russian they kill. This is the reality. There is no technology that can change that outcome.
The Wall Street Journal reported that they're going to be in the next spring counteroffensive. These pilots are training to use F-16s next year.
That seems to be, but it's sort of I wonder why they think this war will still be going next year. You know, I think they were lured into a false sense of Russian behavior by what happened last fall in the aftermath of the Ukrainian counteroffensive that drove the Russians out of Kharkov and Kherson. The Russians went into a defensive posture, building what we now call the Surovikin line, the defensive line, the one that's breaking the back of the attacking Ukrainian forces today. But in addition to building the defensive line, they mobilized 300,000 reservists, and then they received another 180, 220,000 volunteers. That's 500,000 Russian men, 250,000 of which, 250,000, have yet to be committed into this fight. They're equipped, they're trained, they're ready to go. You honestly think Russia's going to hit pause because the Ukrainian army can no longer carry out offensive operations, because the Ukrainian army is losing the defensive battle in Kupiansk, because Ukraine has said, we're tired, we have no more men, we have no more equipment, let's hit pause so that we can rebuild over the winter so we can carry out a new counteroffensive in the spring with F-16 fighter support. You really think Russia's going to play that game? This war is over. This war is over. The Ukrainian army is about to collapse. And when it does collapse, 250,000 Russian troops are going to be thrown into the battle, and it's game, set, match. They are going to precipitously withdraw to the Dnieper River and beg for terms of surrender.
Do you think that these generals like Petraeus are still thinking that Ukraine can prevail, or they're playing a political role?
Any general retired who appears on mainstream media is there for one reason only. That's because they have a narrative that the mainstream media finds attractive to their viewership. Petraeus isn't saying what he thinks. First of all, I don't know what he thinks, but if he actually believes what he's saying, then he's an idiot. And remember, General Petraeus is a man who went before the United States Congress repeatedly while he wore 4 stars on his shoulder and lied to them about Afghanistan, lied to them about Iraq. So he's not a man of honor. He's not a man of integrity. This is a liar who was able to lie when the consequences of his lies were measured in the lives of American soldiers. So you think he's now going to have remorse when the consequences of his lies are measured by Ukrainian soldiers? Not at all. He makes money for saying what he's saying. Everybody needs to understand that Petraeus is paid a certain amount of money per appearance. So the more he comes on to spew his nonsense, the more money he makes, and that's all he cares about. He's not telling the truth. He's not giving honest military assessment. He's lying because he's paid to lie. So is Ben Hodges. So is everybody. Spider Marks. All of these talking heads who appear on TV, these former generals, they're not there to tell the truth, because the truth isn't what mainstream media wants told. They're there to promote the narrative dictated to them by the government. They aren't journalists anymore. They're stenographers. They simply receive an instruction and repeat the instruction. And Petraeus is part of that system. So people need to be aware that when they see Petraeus speaking, throw away the 4 stars, throw away the uniform. You're looking at little more than a puppet, a Pinocchio who tells lies. Watch his name.
Do you think that Biden really knows what's going on in Ukraine, or he's not aware of the situation in Ukraine?
I think President Biden's cognitive abilities have deteriorated rapidly over the course of the past months. I don't know what he knew, but I believe whatever he knew, he knows less today. You see him on TV literally falling apart. This is a crime against the elderly. And it's a shame that America has allowed it to happen. It's a shame that his wife allows it to happen. But what's really a shame is that the media allows it to happen without question. This should be called out. This man is unfit to be commander-in-chief. It doesn't matter what your politics are. I'm not saying he's unfit because of his, the stances he take. I would never vote for him, but apparently enough Americans did that made him president. He's unfit because today he's literally unfit to be president. This is a man whose finger can launch nuclear weapons, and he is literally brain dead. We are watching his brain get addled before us as he speaks. he should not be commander-in-chief, which means who's making the decisions? And now we get to the fact that the people making decisions are people such as Joe Biden, who makes a daily decision about his lifestyle. We didn't vote for her. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, nobody voted for him. He didn't go before the United States Senate. He's a Hillary Clinton wannabe. He worked for her. So we're looking at a cabal of players that have links to Hillary Clinton, to Barack Obama, unelected officials who are out there, and they're the ones who are controlling indirectly the policies that Joe Biden is drooling about when he implements them. This is not democracy. It's the opposite.
Do you think that they're going to continue this war until 2024 for this election?
They don't have a vote. They aren't fighting. This war will go as long as Ukraine has men willing to die for this war. When Ukraine runs out of men willing to die for this war, the war ends. And Russia is killing Ukrainian men at a prodigious level. And I think that Ukraine will run out of men willing to die for this war well before November 2024. That rhymed. I'm a poet. I don't know.
When we see these videos, these pictures of the western part of Ukraine, they're dancing. It doesn't seem that this is a country that is dealing with a major war in the eastern part.
I just will remind people of the tragic history of Ukraine. In 1943, Ukrainian nationalists, the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalism, led by Stepan Bandera, his forces initiated an action to purify the Volyn district of Ukraine and Poland. They killed 110,000 Poles, mainly civilians. They butchered them, literally went into villages and butchered women, children, old men. They stuffed them into barns. They set them on fire. They burned them to death, shouting Slava Ucraina as they did this. The goal was to create a pure Ukraine. The depopulation of Western Ukraine was such that when the Soviets came in and resumed control over this territory, they brought in Ukrainians from Eastern Ukraine and from Central Ukraine to come in and help rebuild Western Ukraine. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists declared war on these Eastern Ukrainians, slaughtering them. 200,000 Eastern Ukrainians and non-Western Ukrainians were slaughtered. And that mindset exists today in the West. They view themselves as separate from. They are Greek Catholics. They are not Russian Orthodox. Their whole genealogy lineage comes from a separate source than the rest of Ukraine. So of course they're dancing. Of course they're partying, because this war, it's a win-win for them. They hate the Russians, and the Russians are killing Eastern Ukrainians that they hate as well.
We heard that the mayor of Kiev is willing to run for presidential election in Ukraine. Do you see any alternative for Zelensky inside Ukraine?
The mayor of Kiev is a Ukrainian nationalist who endorses the ideology of Stepan Bandera. When you identify a potential candidate for the Ukrainian presidency that can step up today and say, I condemn Stepan Bandera and his odious ideology with all of my heart, I'll say that's a potential replacement for Zelensky. Otherwise, you're replacing one hate-filled individual with another hate-filled individual, both of whom continue to believe that they can win a war against Russia, and they can't, and the end result will just be more dead Ukrainian men.
Odessa and Nikolaev will remain Ukrainian, or Russia going to take them as well?
Russia did not start this war for territorial acquisition. We know this because we look at the Russian terms that Russia agreed to in the March negotiated settlement that could have been signed on 1 April, bringing it into this conflict. Russia was going to evacuate all territories it had occupied after February 24th, 2022. The territories of the Donbass, Lugansk and Donetsk, would be independent from Ukraine, but they would have a referendum to decide which way they want to go. Remain part of Ukraine, stay independent. But Russia was going to withdraw, and indeed Russia, in a good faith effort, did withdraw from Kiev, from Sumy, and from other areas. Only after Ukraine rejected the peace settlement and began continuing combat operations did Russia then undertake a military operation where the acquisition of Kherson and Zaporizhia became required to create a land bridge connecting Crimea with the rest of Russia. And once they took these territories, Russia said, we will never abandon the Russian population here or the population there to the Banderists who are operating out of Kiev. So they held referendum, and the people voted in favor of joining Russia, and they were brought into Russia, and they are now part of Russia, and they will always be part of Russia. They will never be returned to Ukraine. And this is an important thing, because many Ukrainians believe that even if they have a ceasefire where they offer temporary territorial control, that somehow in the future they will get this territory back. You will never get it back, ever. Zero, no chance. And I want that to sink in, because the next statement is very relevant. If you end the war today, Odessa will be Ukrainian, Kharkov will be Ukrainian, Dnipropetrovsk will be Ukrainian, Mykolaiv will be Ukrainian. If you continue this conflict, compelling Russia to take military action to expel you out of the territory that exists east of the Dnieper River, then compel Russia to take Odessa and make a land bridge with the Transnistria region, you will never get that territory back either. It will become a permanent part of Russia. And once we begin the dismemberment of Ukraine at that level, what stops the Hungarians from coming in and taking their Transcarpathian territories where there's a Hungarian majority? What happens to prevent Poland from coming in and reclaiming the Volyn district that we talked about earlier, that were cleansed by the Ukrainians of the Polish population? Nothing. And then what's left? A postage stamp sized country with no industry, no access to the Black Sea, nothing but a bunch of farm fields that will ensure that they are forever a poverty-stricken people.
If Russia takes Odessa and Mykolaiv, it's going to be a landlocked. How do you see their entry to the European Union?
Ukraine will never be a member of the European Union, just like they'll never be a member of NATO. European Union doesn't want them. They don't qualify. The European Union is dealing with severe economic problems right now as it is. Why would they bring in a country that's like a black economic hole? You bring in Ukraine, you guarantee money will be sucked into that black hole. The most corrupt nation in the world, Ukraine. They will never be a member of the European Union. They don't qualify. Nobody wants them. This is what the Ukrainians have to understand. Europe doesn't like you. They really don't like you at all. How could you say someone likes you when they empower this war to go on that's slaughtering your manpower, that's impoverishing your nation, displacing your people? What friend would do that to you? What friend would encourage you to continue suicidal attacks against a Russian defensive position that will never be breached, that NATO itself could never breach? The people advising the Ukrainians couldn't do what they're asking the Ukrainians to do. That's not friendship. The Ukrainian soldiers should slit their wrists, not to kill themselves, but to look at the blood flowing there. Then ask a Russian soldier to slit his wrist too, not to kill him, but to look at the blood and understand the blood flows in the Ukrainian soldier is the same blood that's flowing in the Russian soldier. They're the same people. It's NATO and the West that have turned brother against brother, cousin against cousin. That's what the Ukrainians need to reflect.
Pentagon watchdog reported that some of the weapons sent to Ukraine last year were stolen. There are some reports talking about these weapons are appearing in Africa.
Look, let's be frank. That's not a good thing. It was inevitable. We knew it was going to happen. But let's also be frank. It's a little drop in the water of the global arms trade that's already taking place. I don't want to hear anybody whining about Western weapons from Ukraine showing up in Africa when Africa is overrunning with weapons provided by the United States, Russia, China, the whole world. Africa is being armed by everybody, and suddenly we're supposed to go, oh my goodness, we're very concerned about a handful of weapons coming in from the corrupt nation of Ukraine. Yes, that should never happen. But let's stop pretending that nobody else is arming Africa. Everybody's arming Africa. The weapons that are coming from Ukraine are nothing compared to what's already in Africa and what's coming in from other sources. So it's sort of hypocritical to talk about that. It's an important issue. I'm not denigrating, but I'm not going to pretend that that's a game-changing moment. Africa is already flooded with weapons coming in from non-African sources.
What's your take on the coup that has happened in Niger?
You know, I come from a country that carried out a revolution to overthrow the King of England because we viewed him as a corrupt ruler who no longer represented the will of the American people. The coup was carried out by military officers who had lost faith in the constitutionally elected government. They feel that the president, Bamu, was working for the French, helping to enrich the French, being part of a post-colonial French presence in Niger and West Africa. And as a result, we're impoverishing the people of Niger. So they stepped in to remove him, to empower the people, to bring the wealth of Niger to the people. It's a revolutionary concept, and it's one that can't be ignored. It's none of my business. It's their business. It's nobody's business but their business. Let Niger decide how Niger is going to be governed. To have other people coming in, especially the United States, after we promoted a coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014, overthrowing the constitutionally elected government of Viktor Yanukovych, and we said that's good, that's a good thing. Suddenly say, oh, you can't have a coup in Niger. No coup there. The difference is that the coup in Kiev was supported by the CIA and backed by the United States. Without the CIA support and American support, the coup would never have succeeded. The Niger coup was supported by nobody but the Niger military. They were acting purely on their own motives, and they would have succeeded no matter what.
China is building up 34% of this infrastructure in Africa. On the other hand, we have these Wagner group that are helping these African countries. Are we going to have a new front of confrontation between the United States on one side and Russia and China on the other side in Africa?
There is a distinct possibility that could happen. I mean, the situation in Niger is very dangerous from that standpoint because the economic community of West African states, ECOWAS, is threatening military intervention. Now, they're not doing that on their own volition. They're taking orders from France and the United States. Believe me, if France and the United States said, no, we don't want you to intervene, they wouldn't intervene. They can't intervene without a green light from America and France. They're being told to get ready to intervene. The good news is that they don't have a military worthy of the name collectively, and they're not in a position to send military power into Niger if they're confronted with the possibility of a significant military resistance, which Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have said. You attack Niger, we all view this as an act of war against us. We will respond. Algeria has said they won't support this, which means Algeria could become an important conduit for the provision of weaponry from Russia. The presence of Wagner is critical. Wagner has been a decisive player in the Central African Republic, in Mali, and potentially now in Niger, which means that that's an additional military capacity that ECOWAS would have to deal with. Wagner has experience in large-scale ground combat in Ukraine. They know what it means to fight a major war. No nation in ECOWAS has similar experience. So that means that if ECOWAS intervenes in the Niger and is defeated, which they will be, a couple things are going to happen. One, the border region between Niger and Nigeria, Nigeria being the most important nation in ECOWAS coalition, the one that would provide the bulk of the military resources, the border region there up into the Lake Chad Basin, down into the border with Cameroon is totally infiltrated with Boko Haram, a Islamic State affiliated Islamic terrorist organization. There's an ongoing conflict there that's not going well for Nigeria, for Niger, for Chad, for Cameroon. But it is contained because they're able to dedicate military forces as part of a multinational joint task force. If there's a conflict in Niger, the troops that are involved in the Boko Haram suppression will be withdrawn and will be brought into this larger fight, which frees up Boko Haram, who will step into the vacuum created, creating more chaos and instability. The same thing holds true for various Islamic State and Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations operating in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, and elsewhere. They will rise up and create problems. Now the United States will be faced with a conundrum. How do we reverse this? It means we'll have to support ECOWAS, and we'll have to provide even more military assistance to bring down the Islamic terrorism that we see in these areas of instability. That's a major military commitment of which the American people aren't prepared to do at this point in time. The U.S. military may not be prepared to do this. And if we escalate, there's a chance then that Wagner could escalate even further by doubling down on Russian support, getting military assistance from Algeria, et cetera. Now we have a major war on African soil. And here comes the worst part of that, because that's bad enough. But that war is going to cause the displacement of populations. already Europe is overrun with refugees coming from the Sahel, coming from West Africa. They move through the Sahel into North Africa, to Tunisia, to Libya, and then they make a move across into Europe, and Europe is done with this. It's one of the major crises ongoing in Europe today, how to deal with the illegal immigration problem, the migrants, the refugees. Europe has been working with the West African states, the states of the Sahel, states in North Africa, to try and bring this problem under control. And they've been having some success. But what's going to happen if you have a major conflict in West Africa, in Niger, is that tens of millions of desperate political refugees, economic refugees, are going to be displaced, making that movement across the Sahel to North Africa onto Europe. And Europe is going to be overwhelmed with refugees at a time, by the way, if Russia succeeds in its fight against the Ukrainians, which I believe they will, you may see 6 to 8 million Ukrainians attempting to flee from Ukraine into Poland and the rest of Europe. So Europe will be attacked with waves of refugees on both sides, and that will be the end of Europe.
Why these people in Niger are so fond of Russia? They're carrying Russian flag. What's the reason for that?
Because they hate France so much and they despise the United States. Russia is not a colonial power. Russia treats them with respect. When Russians show up, they say, how can we help you? They're not like the United States that views them as a lesser power, of France that continues to view them as a colonial subject. Russia treats people with respect, so people treat Russia with respect in return.
These candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy, the Republican, he's talking about I'm going to negotiate with Putin. I'm gonna separate Putin from Xi. It's so strange the way he's talking about Russia and China. It seems that he can manipulate everybody in Russia and China. And the other thing that we see that the Biden administration is trying to send weapons to Taiwan. The same policy, if we recall, it was the same policy in Ukraine. In Ukraine 2014, instead of negotiating, instead of building on those agreements, they start arming Ukraine and training Ukrainians. The same thing is happening in Taiwan.
Well, when I checked, first of all, this time last year, how many people knew that candidate that you just spoke of's name? I think the answer is not too many people. Okay, he appeared out of nowhere. All right, so he's a little flash in the pan that's out there trying to capitalize on the fact that he's the only candidate on the stage that is endorsing Donald Trump without question and all that kind of stuff. That may fool the American people. But now he wants to sit down with Vladimir Putin, the man who's been ruling Russia without any break since 1999. The most capable foreign leader in the world. His only challenge would come from Xi Jinping, who's been ruling China for many, many years as well. So this flash in the pan has the hubris, the arrogance to say, I can sit down with the world's two most experienced leaders and do what? Do what? Putin's going to laugh at him. Xi's not even going to take his call. But we don't have to worry about it because he'll never be president of the United States anyways. This was his moment. That's it, the high water mark. This debate, that's it. Doesn't matter. After this debate, Trump's numbers are going to go up even higher. And if he avoids going to prison, he could be the Republican candidate in the next election. And given Joe Biden's declining health, there's a good chance he could become president of the United States again. And so nobody's going to care what this nobody, this flash in the pan is saying about anything. It's irrelevant. I can guarantee you that Vladimir Putin's not losing any sleep over this. Neither is Xi Jinping. They aren't waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Oh my God, we're going to be interrogated by this new American political figure who appeared out of nowhere. They don't care. Neither does the rest of the world. So it's irrelevant. Taiwan, last time I checked, the military aid package that was going in was measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. And if we've learned anything from Ukraine, that ain't that much. So, yeah, we're sending weapons to Taiwan. China will object, of course, but it's not going to change the balance of power, especially between now and January of next year, where Taiwan will have an election, where the current ruling party has a good chance of losing, and the Kuomintang party, the opposition party, could win. And if they win, they're going to have a completely different approach on China with less emphasis on receiving military aid from the United States, more emphasis on repairing diplomatic relations with China.
If we look at Taiwan, it's an island. It's not like Ukraine. Ukraine at the other side has Poland that can provide Ukraine with weapons, with everything. If China encircle this island, how are they going to survive?
They're not. The war will be over relatively quickly, and Taiwan will be decisively defeated, and any American military force that's brought to bear against China during this process will be defeated as well.
In the Biden administration, is there any military expert thinking of the situation in Taiwan is totally different from that of Ukraine?
Yes, there's an Air Force General, Lieutenant General Hainote, I believe I could be mispronouncing that name, Hinote, I believe is how it's spelled. He's a general who manages several things regarding planning, including wargaming. And he's been doing wargaming on Taiwan since, I believe, 2018, 2019. He recently briefed the Pentagon on the fact that based upon every war game that the Pentagon's been doing, not these fake war games done by institutions and think tanks where they game the system to get the semblance of an American victory, real war games with real military capabilities at play, he briefed and said, we lose every time. So we need to be careful about embarking on policies that could lead to conflict, because we know going in, it's a fait accompli that we will lose. There's nothing we can do to win. China wins every single time, not just a little bit, but big. It'll be humiliating, dangerous for us. This is why Tony Blinken went to China back in, I believe it was July, crawling on his knees, humiliated because he had to reset American-China policy, which was heading down the path of confrontation. This is why Janet Yellen went to China. The same thing, part of a reset. And this is the reality that the Biden administration knows. They've been briefed. We can't win a war against China, so there's no reason to get us involved in a policy course of action that leads to the potential of conflict with China. So in this case, we should thank the American generals in B, because unlike Petraeus before them, these guys are actually telling the truth.
In this BRICS summit, we have 6 new countries joining BRICS, and Iran, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and UAE and Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. If you remember, Iran and Saudi Arabia didn't have any good relations before, but China and Russia tried to bring them together. Now they're gonna be part of BRICS. How do you see these changes in the BRICS?
It's fundamentally game changing. I mean, first of all, we have 2 regional allies, not allies, but partners today, Iran, Saudi Arabia, who this time last year were enemies. They were enemies being whose policies, whose relationship was being shaped by the United States, that needed them to be enemies in order for us to leverage those problems into continued American presence in the region. China, in a masterful stroke of diplomacy, has eliminated that possibility by making Saudi Arabian and Iranian friends again. They're opening up embassies, they're working together in concert on energy policy, on creating a stable Middle East, the things that the United States has never been able to do since the end of World War II, especially since in the 1970s, when we made the Middle East one of the most important areas for us because of energy policy. This is huge. People don't understand how big of an event this is. And it's also a big deal to have Argentina and Brazil together on BRICS. Where you're seeing the South African or South American continent starting to drift away from the American orbit. BRICS is a potentially game-changing event. They still have a long way to go. There's some growing pains, but this was an impressive show of a economic organization that's on the cusp of greatness. This is the first meeting of BRICS when they have genuine world-changing potential. And so far, it looks like they've lived up to that potential by inviting in 6 exciting new members.
We have Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia. All these countries are providing gas and oil, major production of gas and oil. And on the other hand, we have China and India, consumers of these products. Who's losing, I think, is Germany, because lost this pipeline that goes from Russia to Germany, Nord Stream pipeline. How do you see the future of this pipeline between Russia and Germany?
There is no future of that pipeline. It's over. Germany made its bed, now it has to sleep in it. We're looking at the destruction, the deindustrialization of the German economy. Germany went from an economic powerhouse in Europe to the sick man of Europe almost overnight. And it's not going to recover. It has the world's worst politicians. This Green Party has been a suicide pill for the German economy. Their Chancellor Scholz, their Foreign Minister Baerbock are embarrassments. Every time they open their mouth, they just show how unqualified they are for the position. Yet these are the people who are supposed to lead Germany out of the greatest crisis it's had since the end of the Second World War. Not a chance. It's over for Germany. Game, set, match.
Do you see any change happening in Germany? Because new polls show that people are not happy with the current administration.
Well, I mean, history shows that dire economic times is a petri dish for political change, sometimes radical political change. And we see in Germany the growth of the far-right movement. We see a political movement that had single-digit support just a few years ago to a movement that now has 26% support and growing. And there's efforts amongst the current German government to restrict their ability to participate in German politics. That could lead to a backlash that further empowers them. So Germany is headed down the path where it could be ruled by a far-right government, something that people would have thought unimaginable given Germany's history.
The other thing that we have in Pakistan, this case of Imran Khan, there was a coup against him, and because he wanted good relations with Russia, China, United States, with everybody, but it's something like zero-sum game for the United States. You are with us or against us. How do you see his situation in Pakistan?
Well, what's interesting is that when Imran Khan made the decision that he was going to go to Russia and try and get Russian gas and Russian oil provided to Pakistan at lower rates, it was done out of economic necessity. Pakistan's economy was in a free fall. They had no on-hand cash that's needed for these transactions. The IMF was unwilling to float a loan. Imran Khan warned people. He said this vote of no confidence that was being called for in the parliament in April of 2022. He said, this is a coup. This is illegal. It's being foisted on us by America. And he talked about a conversation that was had between the American ambassador and certain members of the Iraqi parliament. And immediately the United States said, no, that never happened. No, never happened. The mainstream media, it's making up its Russian talking points. This is, Putin propaganda. Well, they just released it. It actually happened exactly how Imran Khan said it was. It was an American-led effort to orchestrate a vote of no confidence, pull Imran Khan from power, and then hit him with trumped-up corruption charges that have now resulted in him being imprisoned and told he can't participate in elections. Everybody should understand that from the time he was removed from office until just recently, Imran Khan was calling for snap elections to vote in a new parliament. The government rejected this because they knew if there were snap elections, Imran Khan would win handily. He's easily the most popular politician in Pakistan today. Shortly after they arrested him and removed him from any potential of contending in a future election, the current government of Prime Minister Sharif dissolved Parliament, triggering a mechanism that requires Parliament to have new elections within 90 days. These are elections that Imran Khan and his, by default, his party won't be able to participate in. This is deliberate manipulation of the Pakistani democratic system. It's a disgusting abuse of power, and we still have yet to see whether or not they'll succeed in this. There's still a chance that Imran Khan might be able to win his freedom and then win an election. But no matter what happens, this is proof that Pakistan stopped being a viable democracy a long time ago.
The president of the United States has a crucial, important role in this conflict in Ukraine. To have some agreement, just bring it to a negotiating table. We need somebody in Washington who's willing to negotiate with Putin. How do you see this election in the United States? We have Republican, we have Democrats, we have Cornel West, in the middle.
Well, there's a name you didn't mention, which is Bobby Jr., Bobby Kennedy Jr. Yeah,
I'm considering here as a Democrat.
right. But he can beat Biden and then become the Democratic candidate, win the election, and he has said he'd be willing to negotiate with Putin, to talk with Putin. He feels that the way we treat Russia today is irresponsible, criminally so in many ways. But the fact of the matter is, American politics is driven by the desires of the American people. Politicians feed off of what the people claim they want. Right now, the American people are woefully ignorant about the reality of Russia. Russophobia has seized control of the American minds, and there are no available vaccines or antidotes to this disease. And so it will continue to infect the electoral process by guaranteeing that people running for office, in order to appease sufficient number of people so that they vote for them, will articulate policies that paint Putin in a bad light, that paint Russia in a bad light, and therefore avoid the potential or the opportunity for peace with Russia.
We know he's been under attack from left and right. First, they called him anti-Semitic. Now they're calling him pro-Israel. It seems they don't want him to be part of this election. Do you see his role inside the Democratic Party, outside of this party? Because outside of one of these two parties, it's almost impossible to get elected.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, what you say is true. If you're not a member of the major political parties on the national stage, it's very difficult to become elected. This year, though, could be interesting. We have one American president who's literally losing his mind on a daily basis, and likely will not be able to function to the degree necessary to be an effective candidate, to campaign. The American people are going to see him for what he is, a senile old man, unable to lead America in one of the most crucial times in its history. His candidate could be in jail, imprisoned, disqualified under the 14th Amendment. There's any number of things that say that the Republican candidate will not only be unqualified for office, but unable to assume office. So given these two potential candidates, RFK Jr. suddenly is a very viable candidate. One, he can defeat a senile old man in a Democratic primary. He's doing very well in the polling, better than anybody thought he'd do at this stage. And Biden's just going to get worse. So as long as Bobby Kennedy Jr. doesn't make any major political gaffes, career-ending moves, who was the Colorado senator who fooled around on a boat named Monkey Business. Don't do anything like that in the 1980s. I think you can't say that under no circumstances would he be the Democratic candidate. There's a possibility he would be. And then if he's running against a president that is either in prison or a candidate that's either in prison or unable to run, by default he becomes the president. So I don't think it's unrealistic to talk about Bobby Kennedy Jr. being president of the United States.
Do you think the Democratic Party is going to have primaries? There are some rumors that they're going to replace Joe Biden at the convention with somebody like Gavin Newsom.
They might, but at that point in time, then frankly speaking, that's when people should seize the convention, take it over, evict the Democratic National Committee as undemocratic, unrepresentative of the voices of the American people, and instill their own candidate. You can't game the system like that, not on this scope and scale. That would just be wrong to do. So I think that if they do that, then they won't get away with that. I think they need to have a primary. I think they need to be seen as seeking the will of the people in this election. I can guarantee you that if the Democrats appoint somebody at the convention and that becomes the candidate, all you've done is ensure that Donald Trump becomes the next president of the United States.